Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I hope you are all keeping well. My name is Andrew Kanyejire. I'm with the communications team here at the IMF. Welcome to the April 2021 virtual spring meetings, Regional Economic Outlook press briefing on Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm joined by Abebe Aemro Selassie, the Director of the African Department here at the IMF. Good morning, Abe.
Good morning, Andrew.
Thank you. And before we go to Abe for his opening remarks, just to let you know that if for some reason you lose us, and if you're on WebEx, you can also view and listen in on some of our social media platforms, on YouTube, on Twitter, Facebook, you name it. And we've also received some questions already that have come through. In the meantime, please use the press center, use WebEx chat section to send your questions in. You can use also your email to send them through. Without much further ado, I'll now ask Abed to make some opening remarks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Good morning, good afternoon to you. Thank you all for joining us for the release of the April Regional Economic Outlook for Sub-Saharan Africa. Before I come to our assessment of the economic outlook, challenges and policy priorities, I want to take a moment to reflect on the pandemic and health developments in the region. Since our October 2020 Regional Economic Outlook, Sub-Saharan Africa has confronted a second wave of the coronavirus pandemic. This second wave outpaced the scale and speed of the first wave. At the same time, we've seen, of course, a truly exceptional global effort to develop an effective vaccine. Although the processing, manufacturing, procuring and deploying vaccines is off to an unequal start around the world. Many advanced countries have secured enough vaccines to cover their populations several times over. In contrast, many sub-Saharan African countries, as you know, are struggling to simply vaccinate essential frontline workers. Few countries in the region will achieve widespread vaccine availability before 2023 on current trends. With such scant access to vaccines, it leaves many countries in the region bracing for the risk of additional waves of infection. This, of course, is not just a regional concern or a local concern. Ensuring vaccine coverage for Sub-Saharan Africa is, we believe, a very, very high-value global public good. As such, we feel that the international community needs to come together and ramp up the supply of vaccines, ensure that there is more than sufficient financing for facilities like COVAX, and to quickly distribute these vaccines, excess vaccines from wealthy countries to countries in Africa and other parts of the world as quickly as possible. The economic costs of the vaccine really are tremendous. We estimate the region's economy contracted by 1.9% in 2020. While this is somewhat less severe, about 1 percentage point less than we projected in October, at 2% contraction, it's still the worst outcome on record. Fortunately, the region will recover some ground this year and is projected to expand by 3.4%. Even so, per capita output is not expected to return to 2019 levels until after 2022. This economic hardship has caused significant social dislocation. In many countries, per capita income will not return to pre-pandemic levels until 2025. The number of people living in extreme poverty in sub-Saharan Africa is projected to have increased by 32 million just last year. There has also, of course, been tremendous learning loss for young people. Students in the region have missed more than 4 times the days missed by children in advanced countries, for example. This risks reversing years of progress and the region falling behind the rest of the world. The outlook for sub-Saharan Africa is expected to diverge from the rest of the world, with constraints on policy space, the vaccine rollouts I mentioned, holding back near-term recovery. While advanced economies have deployed extraordinary support that is now driving the recoveries, for most countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, this is not an option. As we have observed throughout the pandemic, the outlook is subject to greater than usual uncertainty. The main risk is that the region could face repeated COVID-19 episodes before vaccines become available. But there are a range of other factors, such as limited external concessional financing, political instability, domestic security, or climate events that could also jeopardize the recovery. More positively, perhaps, faster than expected vaccine supply or rollout could boost the region's near-term growth prospects. This brings me to the policies and priorities for nurturing the much-needed strong recovery. I mean, the immediate recovery, of course, remains to save lives. This will require more spending to strengthen local health systems and containment efforts, as well as, of course, the vaccine rollout effort that's needed. For most countries, the cost of vaccinating 60% of the population will require increasing health spending, in a few cases by as much as 50%. The next priority is to reinforce the recovery and unlock the region's growth potential with bold and transformative reforms. These are more urgent than ever and include reforms to strengthen social protection systems, promote digitalization, improve transparency and governance, and mitigate climate change. Delivering on these reforms while overcoming the scarring from the crisis will require difficult policy choices. We have no doubt about that. Countries will have to tighten fiscal space to address debt vulnerabilities where those are present and restore the health of public sector balance sheets over the medium term. This is particularly the case for the 17 countries in the region that are at high risk of debt distress or already in debt distress. By pursuing actions to mobilize domestic revenue, prioritize essential spending, and more effectively manage public debt, policymakers can create the fiscal space needed to invest in the recovery. But the region cannot do it alone, which brings me to my final point, the role of the international community and the crucial need for further support. Along with the international community, the IMF over the last year has, of course, moved swiftly to help cover some of the region's emergency financing requirements. This includes support via the emergency funding facilities, increased access under existing arrangements, and debt relief for the most vulnerable countries through the CCRT. The G20 Debt Risk Suspension Initiative also delivered valuable breathing space for many countries in the region, alleviating debt service pressures in excess of $6.5 billion from mid-2020 to what is in the pipeline through mid-2021. For countries where deeper debt relief may be needed, the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatment could provide a mechanism to tailor solutions to each country's circumstances. However, much more is needed to boost spending, the pandemic response, to maintain adequate reserves, and accelerate the recovery to where the income gap with the rest of the world is closing rather than getting wider. To do this, countries in Sub-Saharan Africa will need additional external funding of around $425 billion over the next 5 years. An SDR allocation by the IMF would be an important step to providing liquidity to the most vulnerable Sub-Saharan African countries. However, meeting the region's total needs will require significant contributions from all potential sources: private capital flows, international financial institutions, debt-neutral support via ODA, debt relief, and capacity development for countries to use these resources effectively. Thank you, and I'll stop here, Andrew.
Thank you, Abe. So we'll now turn to questions. We see some of you on WebEx, thank you, and some have come through the press center and the media box. Request that you keep the questions short and to the point. I will start, Abe, with a question that came in overnight from Julius Bizmungu of CNBC Africa in Kigali. And he would like to know your views on the performance of the East African sub-region, as well as the outlook for commodity and tourism-dependent countries in that sub-region. So that's sort of one key question there. Then he has a quick follow-up. What should countries be doing to support the recovery in that sub-region? Thanks.
Thank you. So on East Africa, I mean, it is one of the regions that has seen growth. The EACE 5, for example, the contraction in growth was, growth last year we estimate at minus 0.2%. So close to zero, no expansion, but not kind of the deep contraction that we've seen elsewhere in the region. And this year, the recovery we expect to be also faster than the rest of the region, closer to 5.5%. This is, of course, in keeping with the region's traditionally stronger, more robust growth performance. So, that's how the EAC5 are differentiated from the rest of the region. That said, I mean, even 0% growth last year is, of course, quite costly. And per capita terms, it still means that living standards declined for people. So the hit has been really very big. And going forward, much will depend on really, given that some of those countries are heavily dependent on tourism, much will depend really on containing the pandemic and, reaching the vaccination levels to bring herd immunity. This is why really a major theme of these spring meetings, as you know, has been, us reiterating Kristalina's point that in the near term, for our countries also, vaccine policy is economic policy. Without vaccinations, we cannot move beyond this pandemic. So that getting vaccinations to roll out is really very important.
Thank you, Abe. Let's turn to Simon Ateba. Simon, please go ahead. Today News Africa. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you for taking my question. This is Simon Ateba with Today News Africa in Washington, D.C. I know Ethiopia has been facing many crises, instability in the Tigray region and instability in the Oromia region, plus COVID-19. How have all those crises affected the economy of Ethiopia under the leadership of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed? And what would be your recommendation for the Ethiopian government? Thank you.
Simon, because of my nationality, I am, required to not comment on issues of Ethiopia. But needless to say, of course, the tremendous suffering that we see in my country is, it goes without saying that it's heartbreaking, and getting peace and stability, not just for Ethiopia, for every other country, is going to be paramount for any kind of development progress.
Thank you, Abe. Do we have ENCA on WebEx? I have a question from ENCA. Heidi or somebody from ENCA, go ahead. South Africa. If not, Abe, the question on South Africa, we're going into country issues now. So what does the IMF think about the pace of structural reforms in the country? Do you think that they're being held back by lack of political will? I think we've had that tone before. And is the improved forecast for South Africa something that can be achieved? And do you see it as being worthwhile for improving the welfare of the people in South Africa?
Thanks. South Africa, of course, the region's, largest and most sophisticated, one of the largest and most sophisticated, by far the most sophisticated economy in the region. what we've seen, pre-crisis is the calibration of macroeconomic policies being as supportive as they can be, and yet growth outcomes have been really very, very anemic. This really points to factors beyond, tighter macroeconomic stance holding back economic activity, and the kind of reforms that South Africa has needed for many years being a prerequisite to get high economic growth. We're talking here about more competitive product markets, for example, ensuring that there is, adequate supply of energy, which in some cases was holding back supply. So tackling these issues remain paramount. I mean, South Africa now, given the hit that the pandemic has caused, not just on people's lives and livelihoods, but also the potential scarring that it could have on future economic activity, it really, really is paramount that the reforms that the country needs to boost growth are pursued as quickly as possible. We project the economy having contracted by around 7% last year, which is really, really brutal, coming on top of, many years where there's been limited per capita income growth. We do expect a recovery this year, in large part just reopening of economic activity, but building on that and ensuring that South Africa reverts back to the very high growth rates that it was enjoying in the 2000s is going to be really critical for the people's welfare to improve.
Thank you, Abe. We'll go back to the WebEx. Chris Spink, Reuters.
Thank you very much. I had a question about the implementation of the common framework. Zambia and Ethiopia have both said they want to use it, but have taken different approaches so far to treating the private sector creditors, in particular bondholders. Is there any clear guidance on how the framework will be implemented in practice, particularly with regard to bondholders? I see that there's a note that Angola hasn't chosen to use the common framework in its discussions with some of its private sector creditors.
Thanks. So, first, a really important aspect of the common framework is that it allows for individual countries' circumstances to be taken fully into account in how it's going to work. Second, we're still in the very early stages of the implementation of the common framework. As you know, there's a Chad Creditor Committee meeting today, and that's as far as things have gone. And the other two countries that the other country that is expected also to have discussions in that context is Ethiopia in the coming weeks. Zambia, we still have yet to agree on a program that we can support, and before bringing, finalizing the sustainability analysis and bringing it to creditors. But really, the key difference between the Ethiopia and Zambia approaches is going to be the structure of debt, and that will really determine, what kind of discussions need to be had, which kind of creditors. Zambia, of course, has a lot more exposure by way of Eurobonds than, say, Chad or Ethiopia. So that also, has a bearing on the kind of discussions that need to be had.
Thank you, Abe. Mario Batista, Lusa, are you there? Please go ahead. Mario, we can't hear you. Okay, you're good to go now, Mario. No, still not. Mario, we'll come back to you. I think you might be muted. Let's go to George Wiafe, Ghana. No. We can't hear you either, George. So let me, as we sort out audio issues, let me turn to a question that came in overnight. Abe, it's on Nigeria. It's from Onyinye Nachuku of Business Day Nigeria. And the question is, a growth projection of 2.5% by the IMF for Nigeria looks quite ambitious, considering where the country is now. What do you think is fueling this growth confidence from the fund? And how much will the global shift for greener energy affect Nigeria's economy, considering that they haven't yet made significant push in that direction?
Thanks. We are seeing in quite a lot of countries a recovery this year, simply by virtue of the fact that, economic activity, which had by design been held back through the containment measures countries have needed to adopt last year, is now going to be, hopefully, provided the pandemic continues to remain under control, economic activity should rebound, and so that will give stronger growth outcomes this year in many cases. This is very different from saying that the fundamental drivers of growth over the medium to long term have been improved in a dramatic way, allowing stronger growth. So that's a point I would stress. In the case of Nigeria, really ensuring that the country enjoys and unleashes its tremendous potential requires reforms in 3 areas in our view. I think first and foremost really is more fiscal space needs to be created through domestic revenue mobilization to pay for investments in health, in education, in infrastructure, which Nigeria so desperately needs. That's really, really key. Second, I think reforms in the energy sector are going to be paramount. Cost of doing business is very high on account of the inefficiencies in the energy sector, power supply interruptions, the famous recourse to the use of highly inefficient and harmful generator use up and down the country. Again, getting power supply, getting policies to make sure that Nigeria resolves this problem once and for all, I think is also paramount. And then thirdly, macroeconomic policy calibration, things like creating deep and liquid foreign exchange markets will be really, really important.
Thank you, Abe. So we'll go back to the WebEx and see if we can get some questions in. Happy Zangeni, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Great. Go ahead.
It's just wanted to find out, I'm from Zimbabwe. I wanted to find out what would be the appropriate policy responses for countries such as Zimbabwe, which have limited access to international financing and currently have growing inequalities. And then I also wanted to question your growth projections. You are less optimistic than government, and that's like a wide disparity, where you're saying inflation will be high, upwards of 49%. Government is targeting 9%. Do you want to explain why you're less pessimistic about that growth rate? And your economic growth projection is 3.1% against government's on 7.4%.
Starting with growth, an important reason why we are more conservative in our growth projections, of course, is exactly the point you made, that Zimbabwe, unfortunately, continues to have very limited access to external concessional support. And of course, domestically also, the government's ability to finance itself by issuing bonds or borrowing from the banking system is very, very constrained, given the monetary and exchange rate framework that the country has and susceptibility to inflation. So we feel with limited fiscal support, with the toll of the pandemic on economies, on people's lives, livelihoods, we feel that the robust growth recovery this year will be constrained and of the order of 3%. But this is a point we'd be very, very happy to be proven wrong on, of course. And if growth is higher, we'd be very happy. Turning to inflation, again, it really comes back to the same factors. We do see inflation having come down from the very high levels it was in 2019, 2020 on account of including the droughts that Zimbabwe and Zambia had suffered from. That said, we do, again, given the absence of new inflows, we do see a constrained environment, a much more constrained environment for supply of goods and services. So expect inflation to be a bit higher.
Thank you, Abe. Let's go back to Mario Batista. Please go ahead. We can't hear you. Shame, Mario. So, Mario, I see your question has come through. And Abe, Mario had two questions. One was in the common framework, which you've spoken to. Then the other one is on SDR allocations for Sub-Saharan Africa. And he says, I understand that Sub-Saharan Africa will receive around 23 billion from the SDR allocation. But how much more do you believe that richer countries need to provide? And what is the mechanism for lending or for making that available to Sub-Saharan African countries?
Thank you. Very good question. So, indeed, once our executive board has taken a final decision and, required steps after that, we do hope that the general allocation just approved by the IMFC will allow about 23 billion SDRs to reach the 45 countries in the region. So this will be very, very beneficial for countries to will create fiscal space, the balance of payments support that they need to get vaccines, for example, and or partly to pay for the part of the cost of vaccines and the like. So this is very important. Over and above this, potentially exciting outcome of the meetings was the willingness to explore options for channeling SDRs that are not going to be used by advanced countries to vulnerable countries. This is a very useful mandate, but the work now will begin to try and see what kind of consensus there is on what kind of facilities can be supported by this. Of course, we already have one such approach, where this broad approach of channeling works, which is the financing of the PRGT. The Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust of the IMF, which we use to provide concessional financing to many of the countries in the region and elsewhere. But it's good to see that there is openness to considering other ways of channeling excess, SDRs that are not being used by other countries also. So the work on this will start in earnest in the coming days.
Thank you, Abe. We have about 17 minutes or so, sort of a time check. Just staying on SDRs, this is from Patrick Smith. He's not able to do his audio either, but he would really like you to speak to the question of transparency and SDR allocation. How are we going to ensure accountability with regard to that? And if you can also, there's a few other questions on transparency and governance in general with regard to our support and programs. So maybe if you can take that transparency issue on SDRs and then also on our support to the region.
Okay. Very good. So, first and foremost, transparency, good governance, fighting corruption matters not just for, external finance activities or resources, but all the resources that governments have at hand, right, including from the tax revenue collection. So it's paramount that countries do their utmost to make public finances as transparent as possible, and scarce resources are used as efficiently as possible. So that's an overarching point, of course, that needs to be made. Second, in the context of fund programs, emergency financing that we've done over the last year, we have gone out. We've done our utmost to ensure that there is high transparency in terms of how these resources are used. A couple of examples: we're asking for the audits of how these resources have been used by countries' national authorities, by external agencies where that domestic authorities are not able to do that. Second example is to make public beneficial owners of contracts that are acquired as a result of resources being provided. So we are doing our utmost and will continue to pursue promotion of transparent and government accounts in all the engagements that we have with countries, including in the use of SDRs going forward. And then the third and last point I want to make is that an important, I would say, kind of cross-cutting challenge in our region is that of collecting more tax revenues, domestic revenue mobilization. It was a pending challenge pre-crisis, and it's now an even more robust challenge. Part of it has to do with governments needing to come up with and identify ways to simplify tax administration, come up with the right tax policy handles. But tax payment, as you know, is like about strengthening the social contract between people and government. And really, I cannot stress enough how this second part would be boosted, people's willingness would be boosted if government accounts were more transparent, if everything that government procures was published. So it is really a very, very important agenda, well beyond the near term dealing with the pandemic, for the medium term in terms of how our countries do. So this is an area where a lot of attention is going to be needed in the coming years.
Thank you, Abe. We'll try once more on WebEx. George, if you can go ahead now. George, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I have 3 quick questions, and I'll try to be very quick as much as possible. So my first question is that when I look through your growth projections for Ghana, you're still quite moderate. I mean, first you was 4%, you revised to 5%. But if you go through government's own budget statement, it's looking at a more higher growth than what you put out. Why are you a little bit so cautious about the growth outlook for Ghana? Also, when I went through your fiscal monitor report, you've projected that GDP ratio for Ghana will cross the 80% mark. I wanted to ask that for you as a fund, what are you worried by this, and what are you doing also to ensure that countries like Ghana take some policy measures to control their debts, which could be a major threat to the economy? And final one on the SDR, when are you going to approve these SDR requirements, and what is it in for countries like Ghana?
Okay, very good. So on Ghana, differences in growth projections, there are several factors, that can sometimes create differences between the numbers we come up with and governments publish. So one, of course, is differences in view on, what the global outlook is going to look like, or even country-specific outlook, and, that can be a source of difference. But, another factor often is the timing of when projections are made. So depending on how, what the latest available data is. So I think the government budget numbers were done back in the fall, right? Late last year was when the numbers were being developed, if I'm not mistaken. So our numbers, I think, are a bit more current. So we take into account a bit more data points. So that, I think, accounts for a large chunk of the difference in terms of growth projections. But, I think Ghana is expected to recover by, 4.5%, I think, this year, which is a fairly robust recovery if you consider the region's economy is only expanding by around 3.5%. So it is still a healthy rebound. Of course, not quite back to the 8-9% levels pre-crisis, but still a healthy rebound and something to build on. On debt, of course, we continue. There's no program with Ghana. Our engagement is in the context of Article 4 policy discussions, and we give our advice on what we think are the kind of reforms Ghana needs to ensure sustained development progress. And of course, one of these is indeed making sure, particularly now that debt levels are higher on account of the pandemic and the effect that it has had in impacting the path of GDP, but also aggregates like revenue mobilization and the like. It's even more important than ever for Ghana, but really across the region, to strike a healthy balance between the need to continue to address our development spending needs, but also making sure that debt sustainability doesn't get out of hand. So, how to calibrate this balance is something we discuss with the government. But ultimately, it is up to the government, of course, to it's for the government to come up with the policies that are needed and also to take decisions. Finally, on the SDR allocation, what I can tell you is perhaps how long it took last time round in 2009 when there was an allocation. Between the time when a decision was made to proceed with the allocation and the resources were made available to countries, it took, I think, about 4.5-5 months. So we expect the same kind of timeline this year. And what will happen then is that the resources will be credited to central banks on the order of the size of the quota that the country has. So 100% of the country's quota.
Thank you, Abe. Let's go to, we've got about 10 minutes left. Let's try Helmo Pros in Mozambique. And please don't forget to mention your news organization as well, please.
Hi, good afternoon or good morning in Washington. I'm from the BRICS Post and I'm talking from Johannesburg, South Africa. I have two questions. One in terms of the implementation on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement in South Africa. Certainly trade with the rest of Africa is down year on year. Has there been any increase in intra-Africa trade since January? And the second question relates to Mozambique. We've had terror attacks there, and I was wondering whether the delays in implementing and the new liquid natural gas projects, would that delay the IMF's in terms of GDP growth?
Thank you. So on the AFCFTA, it is, of course, one of the really far-reaching and promising initiatives that region's leaders have undertaken in recent years, with tremendous potential to promote growth, economic diversification that our countries have always sought. So it's something that needs to be built on now that the final decision has been taken to move forward with this. Of course, the pandemic, with its associated effects in terms of disrupting all manner of business activity, has meant that intra-Africa trade last year was lower than previous years. But we do see this as being a temporary thing, and with the recovery, with the easing of travel restrictions, the border closures in some cases that took place, we are expecting an increase in intra-Africa trade. But this will not happen in and of itself to the high degree that is expected without reforms. This includes dealing with non-tariff barriers, which, even when tariffs are lower, there are a lot of non-tariff barriers. So dealing with that will be really very important. And removing the policies that create these non-tariff barriers, regulatory restrictions and the like, will be very important. But also very important also is prioritizing infrastructure that connects our countries. Will be also important to promote intra-Africa trade. So, working on these two will be important to make sure that the dream of the AFCFTA is fulfilled. On Mozambique, what's going on in Cabo Delgado, Palma, is just really horrendous. And all the more so because, it's been this insurgency, latent insurgency has been identified as a threat for many years. So really our heart goes out to Mozambicans. I think, unless kind of dealt with appropriately, it will also be really, really important to, it could have an important bearing on the economic outlook in the country, the gas production on which the country hopes to rely going forward. So it is indeed something that needs to be addressed as swiftly as possible.
Thank you, Abe. We have a few minutes left, about 5 minutes. Probably squeeze in 2-3 questions. I request that we make it quick. Francis Ndegwe, I think in Kenya. Go ahead. Francis, we can't hear you. Okay. Well, on Kenya, Francis, go ahead. Shame. So, Abe, on Kenya, we do have a couple of questions that came in before. If you can speak to the recent events concerning the pushback on the loan from the fund, and whether indeed that one of the questions that keeps coming in is whether that money can actually be sent back by the authorities. That's one. Transparency measures that are built into the support, and in general, how you see Kenya's economic outlook. And that's Julian's Amboko, NTV.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, there has been quite a bit of commentary on the Kenya program approved 10 days ago by the executive board. So a couple of points, perhaps. So I think a general point, not just about Kenya, but really broadly about the kind of issues that this commentary was about. For the last in recent years, what has been clear is that there is what I've been calling a trilemma. Not just a trilemma of sorts that countries have had to contend with. On the one hand, the development needs our countries have, of course, remain as pressing as ever and maybe even increasing with population growth. So more demand to invest in health, education, infrastructure, really tremendous pressure. So that's the first element of this trilemma. Second is, of course, debt levels increasing. To levels that are becoming worrisome in many countries. So this is the second element of the trilemma. And then the third element is governments unwilling or unable or finding it very difficult to raise taxes and people pushing back against measures to collect more taxes. So how countries navigate this space, this between these three poles, has been a challenge for many, for the last 8-10 years in many countries in the region. The pandemic has come and made this challenge even more acute because debt levels are now ratcheted up in most countries higher. Tax collection possibility is more difficult, and of course spending needs have gone up, right? And this really has been some of the challenge that Kenya has been contending with in recent months, much like other countries. It's not unique to Kenya. So how to navigate this is the issue. In our view, and I think the government's view more importantly, is that you need a framework, a medium-term fiscal framework, how to handle and contain debt vulnerabilities and bring them down over the medium to long term. And that's exactly what the program is designed to do. And we, of course, are providing financing, but it's the cheapest financing that's available for the government of Kenya at a time like this. The alternatives are either to reduce the deficit immediately to very, very low levels, which, of course, would mean cutting spending or going out and raising more tax revenues. But this also economically, I'm not sure makes sense because at this time, the economy could do with some support from government spending, given how weak conditions remain. I mean, countries still contending with some regions facing a shutdown. So the program the government has come up with, and we are supporting with this ECF, is really designed to contend with all of the challenges that we see that country facing, and containing and bringing debt down over the medium to long term. And we look forward to working with the government to address any issues that emerge. On the transparency and governance side, again, as I touched on earlier, there are important elements in the program to promote transparency in the use of public resources, beneficial ownership information on emergency resources that were used last year. But I think this is really also part and parcel of continuing to build and strengthen accountability institutions in Kenya, and a lot of work in that area needs to be done, and we'd be very happy to support the government.
Thank you, Abe. As usual, unfortunately, we have more questions than the time that we can take in. We've received all your questions. We'll come back to you bilaterally. We've received them, but the time has come up, and I think we'll wrap here. Abe, any 30-second wrap, 15-second wrap from you?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. The documents are on the website, the report, the press release, explainers, and you can also email us for follow-up questions. Thank you very much, and stay safe. Thanks. Bye-bye.